Astebreed here for 64K and welcome to another episode of Shoot 'em Up Decades. And welcome back. So in case you've never watched the show before, I take a look at 3 different shoot 'em ups from 3 different decades. I review them and tell you what makes them special for me. So today I'll be joined by guest MegaDru. He joined me for the last episode, that one there. I hope you can check that one out if you haven't already. He's going to be contributing 1 review to this video. If you don't know about his channel, check this out.
It's MegaDru here. Astebreed has asked me to join him for another episode of Shoot 'em Up Decades. This time, I've got an absolutely fantastic arcade game for you. For those of you that are unfamiliar with my channel, I mainly focus on retro gaming content. So if that's something you're interested in, check it out if you get a chance.
Okay, so let's jump on over to our first review and I'll let MegaDru start it up.
Astebreed arrived in arcades in 1989 courtesy of IREM. The game is a horizontal scrolling shoot 'em up which utilised IREM's M72 and M81 arcade boards. You take control of King Caius, who takes to the skies on the back of the dragon Bahamut. This was an interesting take on the genre, with both Caius and Bahamut able to attack, and Bahamut acting as a shield to Caius as he is vulnerable to enemy attacks. Different power-ups enable better control of Bahamut's tail, and this can come in handy in certain difficult situations in the game. The different power-ups on offer change Bahamut's colour and provide different abilities. These abilities include breathing fire, homing missiles, lightning, and an upgrade that enables you to wrap the dragon's tail around you, providing a shield from attacks that come from all directions. Each stage is well designed, and this provides the perfect background to the action. The enemy designs are fantastic, with a huge amount of variety, and even some of the easier enemy patterns can be a challenge, so it's best to be on your guard at all times. One of the things that always sticks with me is the game's audio. Not only does Astebreed have an incredible soundtrack, it also has some of my favourite sound effects in any arcade game. The screams that echo from certain enemy types still sends chills down my spine. This is one of the elements of the game that I feel really immerses you in the action, as you frantically hit the fire button in an attempt to clear a path. Astebreed also features some incredible boss battles, as you come face to face with a variety of intimidating and often gigantic enemies. These encounters feature one of my favourite music pieces in the entire game, which just adds to the intensity. IREM had already established themselves as shoot 'em up specialists following the release of R-Type in 1987, and Astebreed continued this trend 2 years later. The gameplay and structure really set it apart from other shoot 'em ups of the time. It can be incredibly frustrating at times, but it's one of those games that has me wanting just one more go. As far as home ports go, Astebreed was one of the first games I remember buying for myself for the ZX Spectrum. I remember seeing the big box version on a special sale for $1.99, so I bought it, took it straight home, and I was not disappointed. Given the Spectrum's hardware limitations, it was a really impressive arcade port, and it's always been one of my favourite games on the system.
Okay, so let's jump on over to our second decade, the 90s. Silpheed was released in 1993 on the Sega CD/Mega CD by Game Arts, a Japanese software developer located in Tokyo, Japan. Their first game was Xexyz in 1985, but are probably best known in the West for their Luna, Gun Griffin, and Grandia franchises, many of which were brought to the West by Sierra and Working Designs. Silpheed was a vertically scrolling shoot 'em up, employing a clever use of streaming pre-rendered backgrounds as the polygon graphics and action was layered over the top. It wasn't a new technique, as shoot 'em up Laserdisc arcade games of the 1980s used this technique quite extensively. but to see it in a home game in 1993 while the CD-ROM explosion was still in its infancy was actually quite a remarkable sight. The game originally came out in 1986 in Japan on the PC 8801, but this Sega CD version is a massive upgrade or remake of that one. The game was designed by Takeshi Miyaji, who did the aforementioned Gun Griffin and Luna series. After some amazing polygon intros which really show what the Sega CD was capable of in the right hands, we are presented with a game that very much looks and feels like Namco's arcade hit Starblade. It's essentially an on-rail shooter that gameplay-wise looks like Starblade, but plays more like Galaga in reality, as waves of enemies fly up and down the screen in a pattern before heading down towards you. The game's difficulty goes from crazy to a walk in the park, so each level is a bit of a mystery, but I like the fact that you have a shield system, which can take quite a few hits before your ship goes into vulnerable stage, and being able to pick up shield energy along the way helps out a lot. And as per shoot 'em up lore, you face up against massive bosses and sometimes mid-bosses in the game's 11 levels. But besides the huge base bosses who are epic in nature, the rest of them are kinda small and unremarkable unfortunately, and can be taken out in quick succession. In between levels you can outfit your ship with a variety of shooting styles, as well as special weapons which have limited ammo. You have smart bombs, shields, homing missiles, etc, etc. The levels themselves are a visual feast, from the large space battlefields to inside the enemy ships, flying over massive planet surfaces. It's quite impressive to look at, and as for the music, it's admittedly very cliche for this style of game during this time period, but its fast-paced nature still make it fit pretty well for the action. There's also a lot of voice chatter from the pilots, which is pretty cool. However, the quality goes from good to unintentionally laughable, which is pretty standard for the early 90s though, and if you want to hear some unintentionally hilarious voiceovers, just watch any cutscene from the Sega CD version of Prince of Persia for massive comedic results. The game was a massive hit in Japan, making it spawn a few sequels like 2000's Silpheed The Lost Planet on the PS2, which was designed by Treasure, and 2006's Xbox 360 game Project Silpheed, which I quite enjoyed even though it's more of a spiritual successor as the gameplay is quite different. Overall, Silpheed is more of a curiosity in retrospect than a great shooter. Its simple Galaga gameplay is good but obviously forgettable, but the sheer atmosphere and production values of the whole game are quite a marvel to experience, and if you want to see an example of early CD-ROM technology pushing the limit, then Silpheed's the game. And for our final game for today, let's jump on over to the 2010s. Devil Engine was released in 2019 on the Nintendo Switch and was published by Dangen Entertainment and developed by Protoculture Games, who I can only guess are massive fans of Macross/Robotech, as their name and cover of the game have that anime written all over it. The game is a horizontal scrolling shoot 'em up that takes its look and feel from the best of the 16-bit, early 32-bit era of shoot 'em ups and combines the two together for the best of both worlds. The game has a simple gameplay style, with your ship having access to 3 types of fire. Collecting more upgrades for the current weapon just boosts its power until you get sick of it and you want to try something else. The game is made up of 6 massive stages that are definitely going to test your shooter skills. It's a tough but fair game, and I always manage to inch just a little bit further each time, although some levels had me stuck for quite a while. It has your usual assortment of mid and end of the level bosses, which murder you at first until you get their patterns, which is another nice throwback to the game's retro-inspired roots. It definitely has no hand-holding, as the difficulty options are easy and hard. There's nothing in between, and I would put easy as a pretty high medium for most players. The variety in the stages is absolutely awesome. It's one of my favorite features. No 2 levels look alike in any way, shape or form. The beautiful openness of a massive space battle, to flying over a futuristic city on fire and these lush massive forest planets. It's very Neo Geo and Thunder Force inspired, to say the least. I like the way points are used in the game also. It's not just generic bragging rights, but used to unlock features in the game, like ships for example. So the more you play it, the more options are available to you. And also being able to change little things like the bullet color or the intensity of the backgrounds to find your perfect visual style is a great touch. And a massive special mention has to go to the music though, by Hyakutaro Tsukumo of Thunder Force 5 fame, as it's brilliant. You got everything from odes to his own Thunder Force work, big mashing metal guitar tracks, beautiful orchestrated masterpieces, and jazzy Kojima-style Japanese city pop tracks. It's absolutely amazing and totally worth finding some sort of soundtrack for. Overall, this game is just top quality stuff. As long as you're willing to take on the challenge, of course it's not easy, then you're gonna be in for one hell of a blast. Okay, so it's time for the wrap up. Why did I choose Silpheed? I chose that one simply because I know it's not the greatest shoot 'em up ever made, but I just love companies that try to push the technology of what they have, especially when it was really limited. Obviously the CD-ROM technology was still in its infancy when that game came out, but they really pushed it to the limit. When I played that game back in the early 90s, I was absolutely blown away. Even revisiting it now, you know, the 3D cutscenes, the way the backgrounds are layered, everything, it's quite impressive. As a shoot 'em up though, it's pretty generic. There's nothing spectacular about it whatsoever, but I just love it. The music and the atmosphere of that game is amazing. That's always something that I just really like, so I think it's definitely worth checking out on that respect. And here's what MegaDru had to say about Dragonbreed.
If you're a shoot 'em up fan and you haven't played Dragonbreed before, then I'd definitely recommend it. It may be a bit on the difficult side, but it's another masterpiece from IREM, and it has dragons in it. What more could you want?
Yeah, I mean, what can you really say? You're riding a dragon, right? It's excellent. I played the Commodore 64 version of that probably the most and really enjoyed it. And for the third choice, which was the Devil's Engine on the Switch, I really love this game. It's super nostalgic and for a whole lot of reasons. It kind of takes you back to those kind of shoot 'em ups you played in the mid-90s, those Thunder Forces and all that kind of stuff. It just gives it has that total vibe to it. Obviously it's done on purpose. They definitely took inspiration from those games, but the game mechanics and the way it flows, the way it plays, is quite excellent. It feels, for whatever reason, a lot different than a lot of other modern shoot 'em ups, so that's why I chose it. I just really love the music too. It's freaking excellent, and you get the soundtrack for that. You should definitely check that one out. It's totally worth it. And that's it for another episode of Shoot 'em Up Decades. Thanks for joining me, Bastish B, and MegaDru on this new episode. Please check out his channel if you haven't already. I'll leave the links in the description. And if you can like and subscribe, that'll be greatly appreciated, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
Hey, Bastish B for 64K, and welcome to another episode of Shoot 'em Up Decades. And welcome back. So if you've never watched this show before, I take a look at 3 different shoot 'em ups from 3 different decades, and I tell you why I like them and why I've included them in this video. So let's not waste any more time and head on over to the 1980s. Xexyz was released in 1989 by Rainbow Arts on the Commodore 64. Rainbow Arts were formed in 1984 in Gütersloh, Germany. They started primarily making games for the C64 before branching out later into Amiga and PC territory, although their most memorable stuff is definitely on Commodore's 8 and 16-bit machines. A lot of Europe's most talented programmers and musicians also worked there at some point or another, including musician Chris Hulsbeck and programmers Manfred Trenz and Julian Egelbrecht. And those are just a few of the many talents. Xexyz was a game that was in their wheelhouse, the shoot-'em-up genre, which they had perfected with 88's Catechus and their brilliant C64 conversion of R-Top. Xexyz was in safe hands. It was a massive 8-level horizontal shooter that took place underwater, which was quite unusual as 90% of shoot-'em-ups were either in space or sky-based affairs. The story has aliens invade Earth from a wormhole under the sea, and they send you, of course, a one-man submarine pilot to wipe them out. On the surface, Xexyz is your standard shooter with bosses and mid-bosses, charge shot and secondary weapons, but it's the ship selection and customization of the weapons which is the real treat here. You can buy multiple different subs and the weapon selection is fantastic. From drones, multi-fire, shields, guided missiles, you name it, Xexyz has it. And the best part is being able to equip it to any part of your ship, almost changing the way you can actually use them. The combinations and variety is immense and gives the game an added layer of strategy. After each level you can also stop by here and spend your hard-earned money and can tailor-make your ship for each new stage, which is where the strategy comes in, and sell old equipment for cash. After the brilliant intro sequence, each level is a well-crafted blast to the finish. The bosses are particularly impressive, and the game does suffer from some sprite flickering here and there when things get hectic, but it's not enough to ruin the gameplay outright. The sound effects are really good, and those Sid tunes by Michael Hendricks are absolute rockers. In fact, the sound effects and music are played simultaneously, which really boosts the atmosphere. The graphics are pure Andreas Escher, the man that gave us Catechus and Turrican 2's visual feasts. It's not in the league of either of those. It sits somewhere in the middle, but the really small designs of the ships and enemies and the variety of the levels, from sea trenches to ice caves and alien hives, is still all pretty impressive overall. Zap64 back in the May 1990 issue gave the C64 version 82% overall, saying, a first-class shoot-'em-up. And it's definitely an 8-bit shooter that doesn't get the recognition it deserves. And with the 1980s done, my next stop is the 1990s. Harmful Park was released in 1997 by Skythink Systems. They were a Japanese software company that made educational software, but in the late 90s decided to try their hand at a couple of games. They put out two on the PS1, namely Kururinpai, a puzzle game, and Harmful Park, a shoot-'em-up. And for a company that was simply dipping their toes into something they knew nothing about, the end results are extremely impressive. This for me is one of the most underrated PS1 games out there, and is a grand old shoot-'em-up in the style of Konami's Parodius series. In fact, the first time I saw this game in a now defunct Japanese import gaming shop, I thought it was part of that series. The game has some nutcase take over an amusement park and take everyone hostage. Two sisters are sent in to get the place sorted, and the game can be played in 1 or 2 player co-op mode. If this subgenre of shooter is new to you, the shoot-'em-up style is simply a standard shooter where everything has been made cute. From characters, enemies, upgrades, and the setting, with the colors usually amped up to the max. Harmful Park does not disappoint on any level. The power-ups or weapons are totally bizarre, from throwing pies to laser shooting ice cream, and the bosses are pretty imaginative, from blow-up dinosaurs, cow trains, demented pumpkin heads, and giant raver girls shooting strawberries. Yes, you heard that right. The music is just as in sync with the retro madness, from bubbly cute ditties to massive orchestral set pieces. They perfectly match the madness of each new stage design. It's also a great entry-level shoot-'em-up to try, as the game is quite honestly a walk in the park as far as difficulty goes. Besides some mid and end bosses which are a bit of a challenge, the rest is pretty smooth sailing. With 6 stages in total, you're still going to have plenty of game to play though. There are also 3 multiplayer minigames you can select from the menu to play separately, featuring the sisters in a Windjammers style game, a fast-paced type scrolling racer, and an ode to Atari's tank game, which is honestly a crazy amount of extra content to get as a bonus. Both this game and Kururinpai sold extremely poorly in Japan upon release, and made the company abandon video gaming altogether and go back to corporate and educational software once again. Despite that, it's a wonderful game that, besides the cutscenes which are in Japanese but don't impede the enjoyment of the game, it's really accessible for anyone wanting to try out this crazy subgenre of shooter, and is an excellent example of the PS1 just being as capable as the Saturn in terms of producing a real quality 2D arcade style experience.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
And now on over to the 2010s for our final game of today. Crimson Clover World Ignition was released in 2014 by Yotsubane. It's the third out of 4 versions of this game that's been released. The original 2011 version was released at Comiket, a Japanese convention devoted to independent self-published works. An arcade version hit in 2013, with World Ignition, the version we're looking at here on PC, being the combo of everything here in one package. There is also a Switch 2020 version if you prefer to keep your shooters on console or portable. Crimson Clover itself is a vertical bullet hell Japanese shoot-'em-up extravaganza that's an absolute feast for your eyes and ears. You first get to choose between 4 different ships, with each with varying speed and refill meters. Then it's off to the shoot-'em-up action. Your mission is to shoot your way through to an enemy base who is making a world-ending doomsday weapon called the Crimson Heart. If you're not used to this style of Japanese bullet hell game, like the ones made by K for example, then this is going to be a real eye-opening experience in terms of sheer on-screen distraction and your ability to dodge 1,000 bullets that are incoming on your location. But it's not as hard as it initially looks. There are patterns and almost rhythms in these types of games that make even the most insane situation possible to survive, and Crimson Clover is no exception. You have a regular shot and a lock-on Panzer Dragoon style feature that launches missiles at everything currently locked on, up to 16 initially, and a break gauge which fills up and once unleashed gives you a brief bout of immortality and increased speed and shot power. And to make it even more insane, multiple breaks can be stacked on top of each other for all-out mass destruction. If you're not used to this style of shooter, it does come with 3 different difficulties, which vary things up enough to ease you into it. The visuals are absolutely beautiful, with a relentless pace and awesome bosses to take out. The sound effects are absolutely spot on and feature some very cool 90s arcade tunes that unfortunately get a little drowned out with all the explosion sounds though. Overall, the gameplay is tight. It's great for beginners to the genre, and a must-play shooter of this decade. Okay, so why did I choose Xexyz? I think that Xexyz is just a pretty overlooked 8-bit shoot-'em-up by Rainbow Arts. A lot of the other shoot-'em-ups are celebrated in the old school computer world, but Xexyz is kind of always gets left out a bit. What I like about that game the most though is the customization. Like I mentioned in the review, you can really customize your ship it's extremely diverse, and it can make such a big difference to how the game actually plays and how you can tackle a level. It's really robust, and it's one of the most robust, setups for a spaceship in any kind of shoot 'em up, especially on 8-bit computers, and I just really love it. Harmful Park on the PS1 or PSX is extremely underrated. It's kind of like a lost Parodius game. You can think of it that way. If you love that series by Konami, then this is just absolutely awesome. I can't believe this game was never brought over to the West. It's such a shame. It delivers everything you want in a shoot 'em up. It's got awesome music, excellent graphics, great level design, awesome enemies and boss encounters, and it's also pretty easy to play. So it's definitely a one for somebody that wants to try out that kind of genre of shoot 'em up for the first time. And the final game I chose was Crimson Clover World Ignition, an absolutely awesome independent bullet hell Japanese shooter. The reason I chose this one is similar to Harmful Park. It's a little bit of an easier bullet hell game to get into. So if you want to try out this genre again for the first time, it's also just packs on the action without messing around. It really makes you feel like you're invincible as you go around just blasting everything on screen. It's pretty easy in the beginning, so it definitely eases you into it. It gets much harder later, so beware. But again, this is another one that kind of eases you into a genre that you may not have tried before. And Crimson Clover, the graphics and the music are just top notch, and the gameplay is just perfect. So I'd highly recommend giving that kind of bullet hell game a go. And thanks for joining me, Bastish B at 64K. I hope you had a good time. And if you can please like and subscribe, they'll be greatly appreciated. I'll see you next time. Cheers.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
Xbox 360シューターコレクションスペシャル。
Hey, that's Phobia for 64K and welcome to episode 7 of Shoot 'em Up Decades. And welcome back. So if you've never watched this show before, I take a look at 3 different shoot 'em ups from 3 different decades. I review them and tell you why I like them. And today I've actually got a guest reviewer, but I'll let him introduce himself.
Hey everybody, Jim here from a little channel here on YouTube called Mad Panic Gaming. If you've never heard of us, we are based in Tokyo and we make a lot of videos about Japanese gaming topics, including game reviews, arcades, barcades, game hunting, all that cool stuff. And I am privileged enough to be joining Bastich B64K today to tell you about one of my absolute favorite shoot-em-ups from the 1990s, and that is the one, the only, Strikers 1945.
And Jim will be adding our 90s review for the day. But let's not waste any more time and jump way back to the 1980s for our first review. Phobia was released in 1989 by Imageworks on the Commodore 64 and was a horizontal shoot-em-up from designer David Bishop and coder and musician Anthony Crowther. This is the same team that gave us the underrated 1988 C64 run-and-gun game Fernandez Must Die. The game kicks off with an amazing title tune that sets the tone for the bizarreness that follows, as the evil Phobos has captured the Galactic Emperor and is holding him on a faraway planet. There is a network of 15 planets in total on your map. You can choose your path to the final one, the sun, where he is there to be rescued. Unlike most shooters, you have a secondary mission as well, where you need to collect 9 pieces of a heat shield needed to get to the last planet, which is the sun itself. These can be found randomly in 9 of the 15 planets. Plus, you have to take out the planet completely, from orbit to the ground, and finally make your escape and take out the boss. It's a lot different than most generic shooters. Graphically, Phobia looks like no other C64 game, using a really impressive color palette and mixing regular and high-res graphics together for a visual feast, all helped by the fact that each planet represents a human phobia to try to dissuade anyone from getting all the way to the Emperor. The themes play into the look and style of the enemies and give the game a massive amount of diversity. A fear of spiders, water, death, and so much more give each planet its own theme and boss. The shoot 'em up action is pretty standard for the most part. Pick up power-ups to speed up your ship or your rate of fire. You can also split your ship into 2 for double the firepower, and the game also sports an excellent 2-player simultaneous mode as well. Taking out the planets in systematic style is very addictive. Seeing the beautiful designs of each theme as you slowly make your way towards the sun is an awesome experience. From Crowther's awesome opening tune, which you would think has actually been playing on Amiga, to the serious programming chops needed to give this game its multi-layered parallax action. It received praise across the board, from computer and video games as 88% overall to Zap64's 92% final score. It's something completely unique and an often overlooked 8-bit shooter that deserves its place in the sun.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
And with that 1980s pick done, we're going to jump to Jim's choice for the 1990s.
Strikers 1945 was originally released in arcades in 1995 and received a lot of ports, including the Sega Saturn, the PS1, and more recently was ported to modern consoles such as the Nintendo Switch as part of the Psycho shooting collection. If you're not familiar with the series, you might assume it has some connection to Capcom's 1940 series, but in fact, there is no connection at all aside from being set during or around World War II. You see, in Strikers 1945, the war has just ended and the world is picking up the pieces when a mysterious multinational organization rises up and attempts to conquer the world with its radically advanced military weaponry. So a coalition of the world's best fighter pilots joins forces to fend off this new global foe, hence why the playable ships include aircraft from various countries, including the American P-38 Lightning and the Japanese Zero Fighter, amongst others. Strikers 1945 is a fairly straightforward shoot-'em-up. Each of the game's 6 playable ships has a different primary attack, charge attack, and super bomb, and they all have their pros and cons, but are all fun to play with. The first 4 stages of the game are always in random order, with the second half of the game always being the same progression of stages. As you might expect, picking up power-ups will increase your firepower both for your primary attack and your charge attack, and something especially nifty here is that you can perform your charge attack as many times as you want, which was changed in the sequel to include a power meter. Also, something merciful about this game is that you only lose a ship when you are hit by a bullet. If you collide with an enemy, it will not kill you, but instead will bring you down a power level, which definitely hinders you, but is a lot better than dying. You can always pick up more power-ups after all, but getting an additional ship only happens when you score enough points, which can be a pretty tall order. This game is challenging, but also fair. It's incredibly fun and includes some absolutely epic boss battles and set pieces, eventually culminating with your fighter plane being strapped to a rocket and launched to the moon, which is extremely cool. Capcom never let you take your P-38 Lightning into outer space, but Psycho, they were just on a whole other level, it seems. Indeed, this game features some outstanding gameplay, cool visuals, and some decent sound design as well. It's the total package as far as shooters go, if you ask me, so if you're a fan of the genre, especially if you like a good 90s shoot-'em-up, Strikers 1945 is a must-play because it's awesome.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
How could you let that happen?
That wasn't too bad, kid.
Pretend it's a game.
And now we'll head on over to the 2000s for the final game review. Astebreed was released in 2015 by Edelweiss, the same team that made Ether Vapor Remaster on the PC. This version of Astebreed we're looking at is the PS4 version, published physically by Limited Run Games number 51 if you're collecting them all. The game is a grand style Japanese mech shoot 'em up that flips between all angles to give you third person, horizontal and vertical shooting action all in one. The plot is massively convoluted, but I'll simplify it into the fact that you control Roy, a dude that gets to pilot humanity's most powerful mech against an alien race who outnumbers us astronomically. There are also a number of other characters, including 2 girls, Fiona and Estina, who provide mission details and fill in the backstory. The game takes place over 6 massive stages with battles in space, inside alien hives, and destroying huge alien facilities and taking out the gigantic boss characters. During these levels, the perspective flips multiple times, giving you third-person action and cutscenes, as well as traditional horizontal and vertical action. You have 3 major attack styles, from regular laser fire to much more powerful melee sword strikes to lock-on homing missiles. In addition to that, you have some powerful charge attacks, which fill up, letting you unleash a barrage of destruction all at once, as well as fast-paced sword strikes for major damage. Unlike most games of this style, your regular laser fire is your weakest attack, so it makes you rely on a combination of all your attacks to survive each level. The story is also pretty important, with radio chatter pretty much ongoing and the story constantly progressing, giving the game a lot more substance than you usually get from a shooter. The controls on the PS4 are also pretty unique and work really well, as you only use the shoulder buttons for all your attacks, and the R3 is reserved for lock-on missiles. I find that when a basic shooter uses every single face button and shoulder buttons, things tend to get overly complicated for generally simple gameplay. Astebreed keeps it simple and is also a good entry-level shooter that is generally pretty forgiving, making progression possible even if this isn't your style of game. This PS4 version is an enhanced edition over the PC release with improved graphics, an adjustable control scheme, and other minor adjustments. So check it out whether on the original PC, Switch, or this excellent PS4 version. It's a fun, chaotic shooter that's an excellent modern rollercoaster ride from start to finish. And thanks for joining me, Bastish B, and Jim for today's episode. I hope you had a good time. If you can, please like and subscribe. They'll be greatly appreciated, and I'll see you next time.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
Hey, Bastish B here for 64K, and welcome to episode 9 of Shoot 'em Up Decades. And welcome back. And if you've never watched this show before, I take a look at 3 different shoot-em-ups from 3 different decades. It's usually a variety of different systems, but on today's episode, we're going to be having a look at 3 arcade games in particular. So let's not waste any more time and head on back to the 1980s. Xexyz was released in the arcades by Jaleco in 1983 and was a fixed-screen shooter in style. Although the background scrolled giving the sense of movement, it's essentially a variation on Phoenix or Galaga, but has enough uniqueness to make it very interesting. I first encountered this game back in about 1986 at a local cafe. I used to ride there all the time on my BMX to play games. Next to it sat a Commando cabinet, but due to the fact that I played my Commodore 64 version to death, it didn't really have much interest to me, and I always chose to play Xexyz instead, as there was no home ports available to me at that time to play. In the game, you control a spaceship as you blast a bunch of giant alien birds, UFOs, and other bizarre creatures that hang out over this planet's surface. You have 2 types of weapons: an unlimited double shot, shooting 2 lasers at the same time, at a much slower pace to take out most creatures, plus a rapid single stream machine gun style shot that just shreds through the enemies in quick succession. It is limited, however, and to keep it charged, every shot you hit with your single double laser shot helps recharge it, so you have to switch back and forth between both shots. And generally speaking, some shots work much better against certain enemies. Like most arcade games of this era, there's also a bonus stage where if you blast all the incoming enemies, you get an instant top-up of your rapid-fire shot. The aspect that sets this game apart from everything else, though, back then was its fake 3D look that used parallax action to make it look like you were flying over the surface of a planet. But the inertia aspect of your ship was something I always really enjoyed. It felt like you were piloting something that was about to land on the moon, as you had to compensate quickly to the different enemy waves as the ship bopped about, as you laid waste to all the incoming alien scum. The game has no music, but the sound effects really sell it, coupled with the action make it a very satisfying experience, wasting everything thrown at you, with the constantly changing backgrounds and new enemy types introduced in rapid fashion. It was never boring on any level. The game actually got a number of home ports. None of them were available to me at that time, such as the Famicom MSX and SG-1000, so the arcade was the only really time I got to play this game. Upon release, it topped the Japanese arcade charts for 2 months straight at the end of 1983, and is a really cool fixed screen style shooter that has largely been forgotten, but is a must play for this subgenre.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
And now on over to the 90s, probably one of the best decades for classic shoot-'em-up games. Another forgotten game by Jellicoe was Desert War, released originally in 1995 in the arcades. It was a unique combination of 90s-style vertical shoot-'em-up mixed with Broderbund's computer classic Choplifter, as you had to blast your way across the battlefield in your giant rescue helicopter, picking up POWs and other stranded soldiers and taking them back to bases for safety. The game is definitely a bit jarring the first time you play it, as you expect the screen to be scrolling and enemies to be coming in fast and furious. But that's not the case. You're in control of the movement of the screen and the pace of the game, with the enemies generally attacking in waves. You have a map to the right of the screen indicating where the POWs are, and landing pads are indicated with X's. One of the main things that you have to account for though is your fuel, which is constantly running down. Picking up POWs give you small fuel boosts, as well as many of them have weapon upgrades to boost your firepower, as the enemies go from mindless tanks to powerful gunships and jets. You also don't die from a single shot, which is good and can take a few hits based on your armor in the top left corner of the screen. It's a pretty chaotic mix of action that feels very different from most shooters back then. I like the inclusion also of the 3 different difficulty levels that each have their own set of stages, therefore completely different scenarios, and are definitely worth exploring for a whole bunch of more varied gameplay. Sound effects, graphics, and music all do a great job, and overall gameplay is very satisfying and quite addictive, with a decent amount of strategy if you want to see every level to the end and take out those giant boss vehicles. It's a fine-tuned game that came out when everything was switching over to 3D in the arcades and got completely overlooked. But seek it out. It's a great mid-90s arcade hidden gem. And now on over to the 2000s for our final game. Dragon Blaze hit the arcades by Seikyo in 2000, one of the kings of the shooter genre. Most of the games, at least for me, always strayed that fine line between shoot 'em up and bullet hell, but Dragon Blaze just fully embraces the latter, giving you a full-on chaotic shoot fest in a fantasy world setting. The game came out at a time when most people simply didn't go to arcades anymore. Japan's arcade scene was still going strong, but most other countries, console gaming had completely wiped out these establishments, and hence a lot of people probably missed this game. It's a pretty standard vertically scrolling shooter for the most part, with you able to pick from 4 different heroes, all who ride on the backs of dragons, and each having their own basic shooting style variations, smart bombs, and the ability to shoot your dragon off literally like a spear to smash through enemies and being able to call them back at will. The game features 7 stages, which are randomized for the first 4, giving you a chance of playing a new level when starting each time, which is always interesting, and the last 3 play out in the same order each time. Each character you choose has their own unique story as well, adding to the game's replay value. Learning how to use your dragon's launching shot effectively is key to survival, and survival is what you'll be trying to achieve in this game, as it's pretty damn hard. It's definitely not for anyone but veterans of the genre, and it'll kill you very quickly like an early 80s arcade game. It was released near the end of Seikyo's run, as the company shut their doors 2 games later. It sports very good graphics, with a vast amount of boss encounters with multiple forms to each one, making them very challenging to take down, and some pretty good music and sound effects to complement out the package. It's not quite as memorable as some of the other more well-known classics, but its relative obscurity, at least on the mainstream radar, make it a fun look for fans of Seikyo's special brand of shoot-'em-up action. And that's it for another episode. Thanks for joining me, Bastish at 64K. I hope you had a good time, and if you can please like and subscribe, that'll be greatly appreciated, and I'll see you next time. Cheers. Hey, Bastish up with 64K, and welcome to episode 10 of Shoot 'em Up Decades. And welcome back. If you've never watched this show before, I take a look at 3 different shoot 'em ups from 3 different decades. I review them and tell you why I like them. So let's not waste any more time and head on back to the 1980s. Satan's Hollow was released in the arcades in 1982 by Bally Midway and was a fixed screen shooter where you have to face off against the devil himself. This style of game was all the rage in the late 70s to early 80s before the horizontal and vertical shoot 'em up genres really took off. This was what shooters were. Your objective is to build a bridge across a moat of lava which leads to Satan's castle. You have to grab pieces of the bridge on the left side of the screen and take them over to the right and piece it together to form the entire bridge. All the while you are being attacked by the devil's gargoyles, who as the game progresses get more and more deadly, originally just trying to kamikaze themselves into you or lobbing down spears, but later throwing exploding eggs and are even able to destroy your bridge as you try to make it and steal your extra lives Gallagher style. You can blast back though from your ship and have a limited force field which can stop their spears and fry them if they get too close to you. It needs time though to recharge. If you manage to get the bridge built, you zoom off to the second screen facing off against Satan himself in a one-on-one versus shootout style. If he's defeated, your guns to your ship get upgraded and the game loops, with lots of additions constantly being added to the gameplay to make it pretty interesting, from larger bridges to build to more cunning enemies and fire-breathing devil heads. The game's cabinet itself was a modified Tron creation, hence it uses the same flight stick controller as that game. I had this originally on my Commodore 64 as well and played it a ton. It was a pretty excellent conversion and came out just over a year after the arcade and was the only home port officially released. It's still a really great arcade game to slap on if you have 5 to 10 minutes to spare and see how far you can get. The gameplay itself might seem relatively simple, but it's very hard to put down once you get the flow of its awesome action.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
Survivor of the Nostromo.
It's here! Come on! Come on! Get it,
baby! Get away from her, you...
And now on over to the 90s for one of the best decades for shoot 'em up games. Xexyz was released in 1995 in the arcades, developed and published by Taito on their F3 system arcade board, which also hosted Elevator Action Returns and Darius Gaiden Silverhawk amongst many other greats. The game itself was actually programmed by a host of ex-Toplan staff members who moved over to Taito after the closure of that once classic shoot 'em up company folded in 1994. The story is a troublemaking robot steals a newly developed time machine and attempts to jump around time destroying human history. You can choose one of 6 different pilots, 3 in 1-player mode and 3 in 2-player mode, to jump through time and destroy him and his henchmen from disrupting the flow of time. The game overall is a pretty standard vertical scroller, with multiple characters to choose from, each with their own unique shot types. You have 2 main weapons which you can switch between, and a complement of smart bombs to nuke anyone in your surrounding area. What's interesting about this game, especially for an arcade release, is how insanely easy it is. It ramps up later, but the first few levels you jump through time are a walk in the park. Maybe it is a way to entice new players to an otherwise really difficult genre to master, but nevertheless, at least the first 2 levels of its 5 time zones to jump to are easy, so if you want a shooter that actually gives you a chance to learn its mechanics and not spam that credit button, then this is a great starter game for this style. Music and sound effects are very satisfying and were done partly by Zuntata, Taito's classic house band, so you know the quality is really great. The graphics are pretty good without being original at all. You've literally seen everything this game has to offer visually 1,000 times before, but it's still done in a satisfying manner with solid gameplay and great Truxton style bomb effects, and a dial back in terms of difficulty with borderline bullet hell gameplay. Its relative obscurity though make it a really interesting shooter footnote to explore, coupled with the reduced difficulty make it a really easy one if you're new to exploring this genre of gaming. And now on over to the 2000s for our final game. Crisis Wing was originally released in 2020 by Past Lives Productions on the PC, but the game is available on all modern consoles, and I'm playing the Xbox Series X version here for this review. It's a traditional throwback to Toplan style vertical shoot 'em ups of the 90s. This game in particular is very much in the Truxton mold. There is zero story in this game, just start and shoot everything. It's very much jump in and play, instant gameplay. Your ship can pick up 3 different weapon types indicated by the green, blue and red orbs, each one giving a different new shot, from the addition of powerful forward shooting missiles to a concentrated spread shot to a much wider full screen spread with a bit less power. As per usual, you also have smart bombs, which are very reminiscent of Truxton's skull effect as you destroy all the enemies on screen. In terms of backgrounds and enemies, the game is a little bit bland. There's nothing too interesting, even though everything is animated pretty good. I particularly like the subtle glow effect over all the pixel art. It gives it a very slight CRT effect and looks really cool. The music is extremely good. I just love the rocking tunes. It's very much in a 90s style arcade flavor with very satisfying sound effects as well. The main game is 7 stages long and then loops, and is both tough and easy at the same time. Like older Toplan games, the stages are fairly easy once you have the right weapon, but the bosses are tough, and that's when things get very bullet helly in nature. It's a game where I was constantly getting a little bit further each time I played it, and that to me is always a sign of a great balance. The game can also be played in 2-player mode and has a host of other fun modes such as Time Attack and Boss Rush. Both are definitely worth trying out to change up the gameplay. Overall, Crisis Wing delivers straight to the point, no nonsense shooter action in early 90s mold, and if you're a fan of these shooters or just straightforward shooter action without the need for window dressing, then definitely check it out. And that's it. That's the end of another episode. Thanks for joining me, Bastish B at 64K. I hope you had a good time. And if you can please like and subscribe, that'll be greatly appreciated. And I'll see you next time. Cheers.